Even if you know something is unhealthy, it does not mean that you can act on it. We have this incredible survival mechanism that we can really just call fantasy in a way, and this is why women get hooked onto potential. We create this survival mechanism, and we created it early on to survive unhealthy relational dynamics. So shame is never something that makes people take clear action. So you're not going to heal or change anything by shaming yourself into action. You're going to heal by understanding the mechanisms that are going on inside of you that are keeping you stuck. Don't wait until it's a high-stakes situation. Build self-trust in small micro moments. You will start asking yourself, why am I still negotiating with things that are hurting me? Shame is a kind of a freeze response in the system. Welcome back. We're going to speak today about why we stay longer in situations than we feel that we should. And I really want to do a couple of things today. And one is dismantle the shame around these patterns and where we maybe beat ourselves up for staying in situations that weren't healthy, maybe they were even toxic or harmful, or they were just misaligned. So we're going to unravel some of the shame so you understand why it is that we stay in situations longer than perhaps feels necessary, and also give you tools and insights so that when it comes time to acting on your inner knowing, those pings of awareness and your instincts as a woman, that you will feel more confident and more trusting, more self-trusting of your own instincts and your own process, and you can start to take aligned action a lot quicker. So before we dive in, the one thing that I really need you to know is that the inner knowing that you have is not the same as having the capacity or feeling secure enough to act upon that inner knowing. And the gap between that knowing and the action, the aligned action, is where shame sits. And where we hold a lot of shame, we also hold freeze. Shame is a kind of freeze response in the system. If we can hold shame or wrongness around the actions we might take, the things we might say, the feelings we have in a certain situation, the emotions, any of the responses, our natural biological responses, we use shame to create a freeze response. And when that exists, what we do is we create justifications for staying, we create stories, we create ways of repressing, freezing, swallowing down our voice, our instincts, the actions that we need to take. And so the work that I do is to go into those places, look where the shame is, and start to dissolve that and unfreeze the nervous system so that all of those parts get a name, all of those aspects of you get a voice, and you start to feel more confident and opening up to moving with your natural instincts. And this is my deepest desire, is to have as many women as possible much more in touch with their instincts and their deepest self-trust. Because when we're disconnected from that, that's when we get in unhealthy situations, when we stay longer, when we waste our time, when we don't hold our standards, and then we don't create the life that we truly want to create. So this is a couple of things that we're going to really unpack and give you today. So we've all been in those situations where after the fact, maybe it's months or years later, we start to be really hard on ourselves and we say, I saw the signs. Why didn't I leave sooner? Why did I let it go on for so long? And the shame that people hold in that, because I hold very little judgment from an external perspective on why people stay in unhealthy situations and unhealthy relational dynamics, because I understand the mechanisms that go on within, and I understand the mechanisms that happen behind closed doors. So what we see from an external perspective versus the entanglement and the emotional enmeshment, or even the manipulation or control, and all those things that go on behind closed doors, are the parts that people don't see. So they'll see like a 2 or 3-dimensional version of that dynamic. But when you've done this work for long enough, you see so many more and all of those layers that actually make up a situation that people stay in, and even when it seems really, really toxic or really, really unhealthy. So the best thing that you can do is just take a breath and soften some of that judgment and that shame that you hold around not knowing then what you know now. So the first thing you really need to know is that you have knowledge, support, capacity, insight, consciousness now that you didn't have then. You're making decisions from a completely different perspective and a completely different vantage point. So even if you know something is unhealthy, it does not mean that you can act on it. All of that awareness that you have now and the confidence and the insight that you have now is something that you developed. It's something that you built, and it's something that you created safety around by taking specific kinds of actions, by building up specific kinds of support. And that's what I want to flag with you today. I'm going to actually break those down so that you understand when you're starting to get maybe a little bit uncomfortable, you're starting to see some red flags. What are the things that I really need to focus on rather than obsessing over perhaps the situation? What are the things that I generally need to focus on in myself, in my environment, to make the answers clearer, to get clarity of action sooner rather than wasting time? That's what I want to do. And that's what I'm going to give you today. So it's not as simple as saying, if I knew, I should have just left. If I had the knowing, I should have just taken automatic action. Knowing something on an intuitive level and being able to act on it are not the same things based on the amount of conditioning and the amount of influence we had growing up around what it meant to actually remove ourselves from unhealthy dynamics. If you grew up in a relationally dysfunctional household, all of those instincts, like we said, will be frozen and buried down. So you will convince yourself that you need to stay there for whatever reason, in order to belong, in order to survive, whatever goes into that. So knowing something is not the same as being able to act on it. Those are completely separate things. So you can know a relationship is hurting you. You can know a person is inconsistent. You can know a parent is abusive. You can know your needs are not being met. You can know that you are losing yourself. You can know that you are depleting yourself by over-trying and over-giving, and still not have the internal stability to leave or make the change that you want to make. On some level, something is saying this isn't right, but then on another level, something is saying leaving or changing the dynamic or creating space or removing myself from the situation doesn't feel safe yet. So those two things can coexist, and they absolutely do coexist. You have the sense that something here is not right, something here is not healthy, and the action that I want to take isn't something that I have the capacity to take yet. And attachment, all of this plays into this as well, because attachment is then saying, don't lose it, because something bad will happen if I lose it. There's the part of you that's saying, maybe it'll still change, the one part of you that's hooked onto potential. And then there's the fear part of you that says, what if I make the change and I regret it? Maybe this is as good as it gets. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. So insight is often very, very early. Intuition is often very, very early, but the capacity to act on that intuition comes later and it's developed. So It's really important to understand attachment patterns inside of this, because we don't just attach to who someone actually is in reality. If you did, you wouldn't stay in unhealthy situations. We have this incredible survival mechanism that we can really just call fantasy in a way. And this is why we get, and women get, hooked onto potential. We create this survival mechanism, and we created it early on to survive unhealthy relational dynamics. So where there was a relational instability, or there was trauma, there was abuse, or there's unhealthy dynamics, there's a fantasy layer that we create, that we tell ourselves things are a certain way, because we don't actually have the capacity to face and digest the reality that we're actually in. It's too big, it's too overwhelming. And it's too big and too overwhelming because of all the content that's involved in that, and that we will cover that today. So if you're just attaching to who somebody is, you would only attach to people that were supportive and caring and consistent and loving and secure and took care of you in the way that you deserve to be taken care of. But our survival mechanism attaches to who somebody was right at the beginning, the potential of who we hoped they could become, what we thought a relationship could become, the fantasy of who we thought they would be, and also the feelings and the version of us that the relationship brought forth and activated in us. And we feel that if we lose it, I'm going to lose a part of myself. This is why leaving isn't just about leaving a person. It's about developing your sense of self enough that you recognize that you own all of those parts of you. You recognize that certain parts of you were attached to fantasy. And by doing those things, you are coming into a much more secure relationship with reality, where you are much more likely to only attach to somebody when they are showing up in a secure way in the present moment, rather than attaching to an idea of us or the person they show you to be at the very, very beginning if it crumbles after that. So it's not just about leaving the relationship and leaving the person. Like I said, it's about leaving the bond, the fantasy, the hope, the future. And sometimes those old, and very often those old survival mechanisms. So it's important just to note that you're not just leaving the person. There's a lot caught up in this. And people that don't understand, and from an outsider's perspective, they will just judge based on a very three-dimensional kind of perspective of certain dynamics. So understanding that nervous system survival, like we said, if you grew up around inconsistency, emotional instability, abuse, conditional love, unhealthy dynamics of any kind, then having someone that is secure and having that environment provided to you is going to feel unfamiliar. So the familiar thing is to stay in the unhealthy dynamics. And familiar can just feel easier for the body. So the thing that might be unhealthy actually can feel safer and easier. This is the part that most people don't understand or don't have the capacity to understand. Unhealthy can be the nervous system baseline. That's what's familiar. That's what I know. These are the skill sets that I have. So I know how to operate inside of this. If I knew how to operate in a different way, I would do that. So it's a skill set thing. It's an understanding thing. And to build a different skill set, if you've ever tried to learn anything new, that's not an instant thing. You have to learn that skill set over time. So your body can actually prefer a painful, familiar reality over an uncertain one that could be better. And this is why often the story that comes up for people, and like we spoke about before, the fear that comes up for people is, what if I leave and there's absolutely nothing better, even though you're unhappy where you are? What if I do leave and this was the best that there was? Because staying in an unhealthy, familiar dynamic can feel a lot safer and a lot more desirable over the unknown that could be and is most likely to be a lot better if the current situation is just not working and just not aligned. This is why people settle, because that is scarier. That uncertain reality is scarier than a painful, familiar reality. So let's talk about self-trust. I think this is really, really important. We've all had ruptures to our sense of self-trust somewhere early on in life, where our natural way of being, our authentic way of being, of expressing, of moving, of trusting our instincts has been dismissed, overridden, or completely shut down. So this is why we can know something is wrong, but we can so deeply mistrust that part of ourselves. We override the instinct and we keep waiting for more proof. This is something that I have seen over and over and over again. And it's where women, and not saying men don't do this as well, but I'm here to speak to the women. It is where women are more likely to partake in situations or behaviors where they go looking for things, whether that's looking at social media, whether that is, looking into their life and trying to find out more about their current situation. This is after a breakup or something like this, because you're looking for proof. You're looking for proof around the things that you already know inside. It's very simple from an outsider's perspective when you've healed those mechanisms to see the digging for proof. And you'll always find proof because you know exactly what you're looking for. What you're missing is the self-trust. You don't need to dig for more proof. You need to trust the thing that's going on inside of you. And that's the shift that we really work on. So you're minimizing what you feel while simultaneously then trying to find proof externally to validate it. So when you recognize that pattern of, hey, I'm repressing something, I'm minimizing something, I'm telling myself, I'm convincing myself something isn't real or something isn't true, but then at the same time, I'm looking for proof and validation around those feelings, a lot of those patterns really, really start to shift. So this is where you'll stop kind of explaining it away and you'll start really coming into the seat of your body, really coming into the seat of your self-trust. And a big pattern for women in this is fawning or trying to be more understanding, more reasonable, more patient, more mature around a situation that your whole body is just saying, this is off, this is not right. So sometimes we do stay because we don't know. It's important to understand sometimes we stay because we need more proof or we don't have the answers yet. And then sometimes we already have them and we're just stuck in a loop of seeking proof for something that deep down we already know. So it's really important that you understand that the difference between knowing something and acting on it is a capacity issue around our relationship with resource. Leaving isn't just an emotional thing, it requires support, community support, relational support, emotional regulation, the way we relate with our emotions. It requires a level of financial stability. It requires us to have somewhere to be that feels secure. If you need to leave a relationship or you need to decompress or be separate from something, you need a secure place to be able to do that. And you need enough energy and resource to be able to hold the aftermath. So there's so much that's cosmic around this too, in terms of when things are going to kind of fall into place. But when you understand that the capacity, the resource, the support, all of those stability issues, if you focus on that as your foundation every single day across the board, it will be so much easier for you to just walk away from things that aren't working rather than getting stuck in those loops of trying to figure it out, trying to break the pattern, trying to break the cycle, trying to find the proof. Focus on building foundations, focus on your community, focus on your finances, focus on your emotional attunement, focus on the way you're looking after your body, focus on the way you nourish yourself. This is the simplest and the most powerful thing that you can do. Often people want it to be so much harder than that. And I'm not saying those things are easy. They can be really challenging, but they are the foundation of everything. And they're not complex foundations. They're very, very simple. So when you focus on those things, you give yourself that energy to hold reality. And when you can hold and face and digest reality, like we said before, then you can actually make aligned decisions. So we stay because we don't yet have the internal or external support or scaffolding to do anything different. So we may know the truth long before we actually have the support to hold what is actually required for change and what acting on that truth is actually going to cost us, because there's a cost of staying and there's a cost of leaving as well. And so if we can't afford the cost of leaving or changing the reality, then it's going to be more cost effective for us to stay. So this is why building up your relationship with resource, building up your relationship with abundance, not on a mental level, but actually creating a deeper sense of abundance and support in all areas, separate to any misaligned situations. It's the absolute best thing that you can do. And this is why also in a lot of controlling dynamics and relationship dynamics, the relationship will try and stop you from doing those things, because that is exactly what it is that you need in order to break the pattern. So the quicker you can recognize that perhaps you are being, or somebody is perhaps suggesting or trying to move you away from everything that creates your foundational support, that should be a big, big red flag. And that is happening in obviously very, very unhealthy situations, but that should be a very big red flag, because then you're going to be in a very disempowered situation. And that happens in any kind of abusive dynamic. So why do instincts seem clear before action feels possible? And so this is probably one of the most important things we're going to talk about today. So your instincts can register the truth of reality very, very early and instantaneous. So you might notice a sense of just knowing. You might notice like a tightening. You might notice a contraction. You might notice a dread. You might notice confusion. You might notice that you're shutting down in certain ways or losing yourself. But as we've spoken about, acting upon those things is going to require more than just the recognition of that happening. So you are going to need, in order to act upon those instincts, you're going to have to be able to tolerate the following in your body. And I really want you to understand this. You are going to have to be able to emotionally understand and feel and regulate disappointment. A lot of unhealthy relationship dynamics don't really have a lot of embodied access to disappointment. So you're going to have to be able to feel disappointment. You are going to have to be able to feel and tolerate grief in your system. You are going to have to be able to feel and tolerate separation from something that maybe feels addictive or gives you emotional highs and things like this. So a sense of separation. You're going to have to be able to tolerate loneliness, because whenever you are moving away from anything, And even if it's moving away from something's healthy and you're just having time to yourself, you always have to be able to tolerate loneliness. Otherwise, you are going to be far more likely, or you're pretty much guaranteed, if you can't tolerate loneliness or embrace loneliness, you are going to be an easy target for unhealthy situations. So disappointment, grief, separation, loneliness, uncertainty. Can you hold yourself when things feel uncertain? Do you have a support network that helps you feel anchored to something when things feel really unsteady and uncertain? You are going to have to be able to regulate and tolerate guilt, because you may feel guilty. If you're in an unhealthy situation, it's not just going to be you, it's going to be somebody else that is pulling on your energy, that feels entitled to something. If you are setting a boundary with somebody that is unhealthy and that you need space from, you are going to have to feel guilty. And the fact that you're letting that person down, even when you know it's not healthy, it's still a very human thing to feel. You're going to have to feel and tolerate the withdrawal from the bond, which we talked about in the separation, and the collapsing of the fantasy. This is one of the things that people are generally not kind of willing to face or don't have the capacity to face. And that's the collapse of hope, the dismantling of hope, the dismantling of the fantasy. That can feel like a bit of a come down, because the fantasy is part of a survival mechanism and it's part of an addictive pattern. So coming into reality can be tricky in that way. So instinct is going to tell you what's actually going on, and then your capacity to be with those things and tolerate those things is going to determine whether you can actually take action. So why does some of that stuff take months or years? So you can feel confused throughout all that time as you make sense of the difference between the fantasy and the reality. And that is because it takes time to build the capacity to feel and tolerate all of those things that we just spoke about. All of those things are part of being a sovereign individual. And in order to access all of those parts, that may take months, it may take years. And so in that confusion process, you might need months, you might need years to let that fantasy break, to stop bargaining with reality. Maybe you do need to gather more evidence. Maybe you also need to feel the cost more painfully. Pain and suffering is a massive catalyst for transformation. It is one of the catalysts for transformation. So maybe you just haven't felt the cost and the pain deeply enough. You also, in that time where you're building clarity, you are building self-trust. And that's not going to happen overnight. You're also becoming more resourced in that process. You're understanding what emotional energy you're willing to give, and what you actually need in order to stay nourished and satiated. So all of that is to say that in that process, it might take months or years as you are becoming more regulated around what it means to actually digest what is happening in front of you. And so the body itself might make the movements and take the actions far, far longer or after the soul already knew. And truth is always emerging in stages and layers that we can actually process it and digest it. So just because it took time, it doesn't mean you were faking what was real for you at that time. It just means that your system is just taking time to catch up to the bits that you were missing, that it was safer for you to overlook at that time. So there's always going to be a lag with this. If there wasn't, and you could digest what was happening in front of you, then you would have the security and you wouldn't be getting in these situations. So it's really important to remove the shame without actually disempowering you around your responsibility. Two things are always true at the same time. And in these conversations, people can kind of swing from one to another, and it doesn't work like that. It means, what this means is that we can dismantle the shame and say, these are all the things that were actually going on. So let's not be so hard on yourself for not knowing what you didn't know, not having the capacity to process all of that information and digest all of that content. You weren't given the structure, you weren't given the capacity, you weren't given the support in your early years or throughout your lifetime. So let's understand that as one thing. And then let's also recognize that you have responsibility to take action, to support yourself, and to not be continually projecting your pain onto others and blaming others and constantly putting yourself in a victim state. Because constantly popping yourself in a victim state isn't going to empower you in any way to make better choices. So the compassion for yourself really, really, really matters. But that doesn't mean we're passive around understanding the lessons and understanding where we didn't know, and then learning what we didn't know and then taking different actions in the future. So removing shame doesn't mean we're saying you're now passive and you stay. And we're not saying that you also stay longer than what you need purely to avoid feeling all of these things. We're going to remove the shame so that you can access your clarity, you can access your energy and your instincts, and you can access your agency and understand what you need in order to take action as those instincts come online. So shame keeps women frozen and it keeps women stuck. And it does this because of it's a freeze state. And when we're in a freeze state, what a freeze state kind of tells us is that it places a sense of passivity onto our agency. So the narratives that kind of come up are like that we're helpless or that we're weak or that we chose it and that we should know better, all of this kind of self-deprecating stuff. And we can simultaneously hold those as truths of like, I chose this. I should have perhaps known better. There was a weakness to me. I wasn't acting as my strongest self. Can you see how there's a difference from collapsing under those stories of like, I was weak, I should have known better, I'm failing again? Can you see the heaviness and the weight of like giving up and there being a helplessness versus understanding those as a reality with agency of, I did choose this. I do feel like I failed in some way in terms of what I actually set out to achieve, a certain outcome in a relationship, a certain type of relationship. It didn't eventuate. So there's an element of like, yeah, I failed at that. There was a weakness to me. Maybe I should have known better at the time. You can say all of those things without attaching a meaning or without attaching shame to it. Those can just be purely neutral facts and information. And that's what we want to do. So we want to pull those stories out from the shadows, and rather than trying to put a positive spin on it, which a lot of kind of mind-based therapies tend to do, we're actually going to say, no, there's an empowerment in some of those facts. And I can simultaneously fail in some way at something and still be wildly successful at choosing different next time. I can have chosen something that was misaligned or unhealthy and still feel really empowered to choose differently. So we want to find the empowerment and the agency inside of the narrative that's happened rather than having more shame around the stories, which is what keeps people stuck. So shame is rarely something, it's never something that makes people take clear action. If you're taking those stories and you feel helpless or collapsed around them, and you're taking those narratives, then you're going to take disempowering action from shame. If you are taking those facts around the choices that you made and then taking action knowing that you want to do better next time, brilliant. And this is because we're moving rather than from shame, we're moving from truth. We're moving from self-responsibility. We're moving from self-trust rather than collapsing under the weight of the whole thing. So you're not going to heal or change anything by shaming yourself into action. You're going to heal by understanding the mechanisms that are going on inside of you that are keeping you stuck. So let's, as a final tool, go through what is actually needed and the steps that are actually needed to move you from an inkling, an instinct, into aligned action. So that next time you feel like something's coming up and I don't know what to do about this, but I'm feeling these same hits or I'm starting to feel like this might be a pattern. And so what are the things that I need to come to? So you can always write these down or come back to this episode at any time. So what helps you go from I know to I'm ready to trust that within myself? And the first thing is that you build self-trust. So the way that we do that is we start honoring smaller truths. So we have to notice where we override ourselves in really, really, really small moments. Don't wait until it's a high-stakes situation. Build self-trust in small micro moments. So notice where you override yourself in small moments, and also notice where you don't follow through. Build self-trust by following through on your instincts when they arise. So this is the emotional attunement part of it. I need to eat. I need to move my body. I need to rest. I need to take this action. Micro moments are what are going to build self-trust over time. So do it in a low-stakes situation so that when you get in relationships that maybe feel higher stakes or maybe where you're more dysregulated, you're going to feel more connected to yourself and more self-trusting of that attunement. Regulate and resource your body. So this is the core thing that I teach to everybody that comes into my spaces in a lot more depth than this, but if your nervous system is stuck in freeze, it's stuck in panic, it's stuck in survival and hypervigilance, or it's collapsed, you want to learn how to resource yourself. Do those things that create nourishment in your system. Make sure you know how to ground yourself, to connect with your breath, to move your body well, how to nourish yourself well, and how to limit contact or exposure to destabilizing stimuli that's too destabilizing over and over and over again. That is really, really important for your resourcing practice. So you also want to be able to handle more truths in bite-sized chunks. And this is just something you can do with yourself and your journal. Name the cost of what things are costing you in an honest way. You have to be willing to say out loud or just see it on paper the truth in the actual present moment. So what is the relationship costing you? What are you losing by staying? And maybe that's peace, maybe that's confidence, maybe that's self-trust, maybe it's sovereignty, maybe it's dignity, maybe it's radiance and aliveness, maybe it's self-respect, maybe it's health, maybe it's time. They can be really confronting things to ask yourself, but the truth hurts and then it frees us, as we know. So come to those and just ask yourself a few questions about what is actually going on in this reality and just write them out. And then on top of that, I was going to add another layer to that, is to let reality trump fantasy and potential. Every single time, because women are incredible at making excuses for things. They're incredible at being dissociated from their bodies because there's such a misunderstanding around the woman's body. So when there's misunderstanding and a lack of awareness, dissociation is just common. And where there's dissociation, there is an attachment to fantasy or potential rather than an anchoring in reality. So the major reason why women stay is this attachment to fantasy and potential. So let reality trump the stories and the potential that you keep trying to use to convince yourself and keep yourself inside of those loops. So the action that you need to take will only become possible when reality is allowed, when reality is tolerated, when truth is tolerated. Because how can you take physical action in a physical body, in this physical reality that we're in, if you are operating from and relating from fantasy? You are connecting to something and someone in a realm that isn't in this one, or isn't embodied, isn't steady in this one. So to take action, reality has to be the priority. So how are things actually going in reality? And you can ask yourself also, how am I going in reality? What are the actual truths of the matter rather than the fantasy that's probably helping me stay disconnected in some way? And the next one is crucial, crucial, crucial. It also is part of your resourcing practice, but it's about creating support. So you may need better connection to community. You may need a therapist. You may need a coach. You may need a secure friend. You may need more structure. You may need a plan around what to do next or how to tackle the situation. Action can feel really, really overwhelming when there's no support or there's no kind of plan. You're trying to take action when you haven't broken it down into digestible pieces. If you've ever taken action towards building something or creating something or healing yourself, you will know that the fantasy, your idea of fantasy thinks it's going to happen so much quicker. And then when you actually go about the process, it is so much slower and there's so many more digestible chunks that you need to go through and integrate in order to bring that through into reality. So give yourself support around making things digestible. What are the things that I need and what is going to feel supportive in this moment? The next one is to work with ambivalence in an honest way. So the ambivalence is part of you wants to be out, part of you wants to be in, part of you wants to be chosen, part of you wants to be alone. And this doesn't necessarily mean there's something it doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with you, but it just means there's multiple parts present. So if you can deal with two truths being active at any one time with honesty, you're going to be so much less stuck in confusion and so much more steady in holding opposing truths. And this is what we could kind of call holding the tension of opposites. A lot of what keeps people in dysfunctional situations is they kind of swing from one to the other. It's either all in or all out. And the actual security is being able to hold both of those truths and then sort your way through the process. So let all of that ambivalence be known. And this is going to make every single part of your life easier. And it's going to stop that all in, all out, black or white kind of emotional turmoil. And then if you're in a situation where somebody tends to operate from that wounding of that black and white or all in, all out, a lot of emotional inconsistency, you're going to be so much steadier and be able to see it and not participate in it or get hooked into it, because you are going to be able to hold both of those realities so much more steadily. And then, so all of that, I want to also close by adding these extra signs that you are getting closer to being ready. Because I think this is super, super important to understand that those are all the things that you need to hold. And then the signs that you are getting closer to taking action that is in alignment with your instincts, alignment with your self-trust, so that you can start to recognize them. And that is, you stop needing this other person to agree with your reality. Massive one. You stop needing anybody else to validate the truth that is moving through you. It's like, I feel this. This is what I need. The action follows. So much of what happens and keeps you stuck is that you are looking for the validation for that instinct. And the person outside of you either can't give it to you, or they are actively trying to disconnect you from that instinct in order to keep you from leaving, or keep you from changing the dynamic, or bringing accountability to them and what they're bringing to the table. You're also going to notice that you're going to stop explaining away what is hurting you. You're going to stop over-explaining yourself. Simple as that. So good. And when you're just like, something hurts, and then I can just acknowledge that. I'm not going to over-explain it. I'm not going to try and tell somebody or convince somebody of that to try and get breadcrumbs of validation. And I'm not going to swallow it down. I'm going to admit that this hurts. And so when something hurts, I'm going to create space. Simple as that. You're going to stop convincing yourself that the hurt doesn't matter. And you're going to stop trying to convince the other person of your hurt in order to get some sort of emotional achievement. You're also going to care way more about your peace than preserving any sort of relationship. Your peace will be the number one. And that's not to say that you become disconnected or avoidant in some way, but if it costs you peace, and it isn't building more peace and more capacity and more alignment in your system, then it's not a bond that you want to preserve. You're also going to notice that you're beginning to really trust your body again, or maybe for the first time. Maybe you're trusting your body for the very, very first time. And all of those micro moments of emotional attunement are all adding up. And so you are feeling so much deeper in your connection to yourself, so much more grounded, and so much in the seat of your own knowing and your own trust. You're going to also notice that you stop asking yourself questions like, am I overreacting? Was I too much? All of this stuff starts to take a back seat and starts to dissolve all of those questions. And you will start asking yourself, why am I still negotiating with things that are hurting me? Because the difference between the aligned action is, this hurt me, I create space, I move away. The pattern is, this hurts me, can I tell them, or can I show them that it's hurting me and hope that they actually repair it? It hurts. The action is, I want to be away from the things that hurt me. That's clear. That's simple. So you're not going to be negotiating with things that hurt you. It's just going to be plain and simple around how you respond to painful situations. You will also begin to grieve far more than you bargain. You'll be able to feel the disappointment and let go rather than bargaining for something that maybe should be really, really simple, or something that is just a non-negotiable for you. And you start actually preparing, like we said, starting to take note of things, starting to put a plan into place, starting to digest reality. You are taking these preparatory actions instead of feeling like your main thing is the hope and the fantasy. There is tangible stuff in the way that you are relating with reality in relation to how you're taking care of yourself, how you're addressing your finances, how you are nourishing yourself, how you are finding better support. You are doing more of these things in present moment reality, and you're spending a lot less time in the hope and the fantasy. This part can take time and where people get disillusioned or feel like they're not making enough progress. But if your fantasy is dying, the hope is dying, and what you're actually doing is putting steps into place in physical reality, please, please, please just keep going. Because the more you do that in physical reality, the more you're going to dismantle the fantasy and the more you're going to heal that trauma, and you're going to put an end to these unhealthy cycles and unhealthy patterns. So leaving physically, I just really want to say this, is not always the first step. I wish it was that simple, but there is information that you need to digest. There is support that you need to build. And there is stuff that is nourishing to you and in alignment for you that you need to build and step into in order to be able to make that reality. So I wanted to make sure this episode felt grounding, compassionate, and also gave you tools and insights into, hey, how can I actually find agency in this? And how can I actually, rather than shaming myself or rather than feeling like, oh, just leave, just choose differently. What are actually all of the things that my body, my nervous system, my mind are trying to put into place in order for me to get from instinct into embodied self-trust and alignment? So if you feel like you stayed longer than you should have, that isn't something that makes you foolish. If you trusted something that was the potential of something over the reality, that can be a survival mechanism. And it often just means that you were hoping something was different and you were giving something far more than perhaps it deserved. But that doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you foolish. And the women that often give more than the reality deserved, that then go on to do the healing work, even if they feel stupid or they feel angry or they feel so hurt and disappointed by everything that they gave that never came back. The ones that then go on to do the healing work from that and actually go through the process to align with that deep self-trust, I promise you, get the best outcomes for their life and their relationships.